I'm Jacqueline Stockwell. Welcome to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur. I am super excited to kick off this series about the people behind the roles of information leaders. Now, I'm here today with Emma Godfree, and I'm going to be quizzing you in the hot seat. So I'm very excited about. So, Emma, tell me about you first. Let's find out who Emma is first.
I am what am I? So I'm a data protection officer, but I didn't start there. So I started in customer service and complaints, and realized quite quickly on that I wanted to do something in data protection. I had quite a lot of passion for it. I really was very interested in it. So during COVID, I chose, instead of to go back to my previous position, I chose redundancy and spent my redundancy time retraining myself in data protection, reaching out to people to try and help kind of further that career path. Someone spotted me through someone else's LinkedIn profile, and the rest is history, really. Here I am.
I love that. I love that. So we've got some synergies in our roles because I was in complaint management as well.
It's
I love
wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful to deal with complaints? I loved every minute of it.
I spent 4 years doing it. So yes, I'm absolutely there with you. So what does a typical day look like for you as a data protection officer?
It's different. Every single day is different. I mean, the job is essentially the same kind of things that you'd be doing with businesses. You'll be doing things like gap analysis, audits, rights requests. What else have we got on the list? DPIAs, policy writing, procedure writing. So it can be very different each day. You could be doing something one day and then something else could come along. A data breach could come along and completely destroy your week's plans. And it's all very different. So you never know what you're going to come into work with, which I think is why I like it, because there's that kind of air of unpredictability about it. You could walk into anything. Lovely.
Yeah. And it's so diverse, but you've got so many hats as well, though, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be able to communicate with people, lots of different people. So you have to change how you communicate on a dime. And, you have to be able to show people that you're approachable, but also you have to do your job. So you have to be able to do the legal pieces behind it as well. So you have to do lots of different things in one almost every hour, really. So it means you're constantly on your feet and you're constantly changing the way you're doing things, which again makes it really quite interesting almost every day.
Yeah, it does. So that's interesting in effect on the job, but how does it affect on the person as you? So for any mental health challenges, because those demands are just huge on you.
It can be quite difficult to switch off. We're sort of being told nowadays that turning your phone off or having, time away from your screens is really healthy for you because you're not supposed to be attached to your screens 24 hours a day. It's bad for you. But it can be quite difficult if you work in an organization where you're having to do lots of different things. It's quite easy, especially working from home. It's quite easy and tempting to just turn the laptop on a Sunday afternoon and just get ready for Monday morning. And you have to be quite careful where you pick your battles as well, because we're here to give advice, we're here to support and to guide. We can't make people do something. We can tell them what the law is, we can tell them what they're supposed to do, but we can't physically make them do it. So it can be quite difficult to kind of turn off that kind of need to make an organization do what you're telling them to do. It can be quite difficult to hear the word no. So I think it's really important to understand that actually sometimes you have to pick your battles and you have to kind of maybe attempt it via a different route. It can be quite a lonely place as well, being a data protection officer. I know many data protection officers who are one of one. They are one person in a one-person team, and having a group of trusted people to rely on, to talk to bounce ideas off, it can be the difference between having a challenging day and actually having quite a productive day, because you've been able to have that interaction with other data protection professionals. If you didn't have that, I would imagine that it can be a very lonely place.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and it's hard, isn't it? Because you've got so many compliance and sort of regulations to adhere to, and you are seen as the person that always says no. So it just kind of
You can be,
giving
yeah.
you that.
If you do it in the right way, you can sort of say yes, but, and kind of try and work around the problem. But there are so many organizations that see us as the red tape and the barrier between doing something they want to do and doing it right. And it can cause rifts. I have seen it cause some serious problems in the past. So yeah, being able to pick your battles and pick the way you fight them can be the difference between sort of having that really good relationship with the organization and not really.
Definitely, and I'd definitely say is that one of the biggest challenges that you have?
I would say so. And people's expectation that I should know their industry regulations back to front. So there have been times, quite a few of them really, where people have sort of said to me, well, do you not know that? And I kind of have to remind them that if I don't expect them to know my regulations, which is what they've employed me for, they shouldn't really be expecting me to know all of theirs, because there's a reason that they're in their job, there's a reason I'm in mine, and we should be working together. And actually, people's expectations can be the most challenging part of it, because they almost expect you to come in and say no to everything. They expect you to know what their jobs are. They expect you to know how the business works straight away. And that kind of thing takes time. So it's trying to kind of wind those expectations back a little bit and try and explain to organizations that you're there to do a job, but you are going to need some help doing that job as well. It's not just all about me and my regulations. It's also about you and your industry regulations as well. So yeah, that can be quite difficult.
And you talked about sort of keeping up to date. How do you keep up to date with the constantly changing regulations and standards?
I mean, I stay active on LinkedIn quite a lot, and I look at things like the ICO. They put a lot of their enforcements and a lot of changes on their website as well. Lots of different news feeds, so I subscribe to a lot of different things. I look at podcasts, at webinars. So I try and keep as active as possible. It's not always possible, because obviously you do have a job to do. You do have very busy days. Everyone gets busy. But doing that little bit here and there, it's really useful. I'm not great at reading massively long documents. I am blind in one eye, which means after a little while, everything goes a bit fuzzy and I need to take a break and I need to come back. So having people who are willing to read those long legal texts and then summarize them and provide shorter documents for people like myself who really struggle with that legalese kind of language is really helpful, because it means that I can do my job and I can do it correctly, but I haven't had to spend 3 or 4 days trying to get to grips of something that I potentially could end up interpreting it incorrectly at the end anyway, simply because I haven't understood. So I try and keep up to date with that as much as I can.
And that kind of raises a good point about the accessibility of training, doesn't it? Or sort of like people that are creating these things, making it's accessible for all.
Yeah, and the law is the law. It has to be written in a certain way. That's what it's there for, which is fine until you sort of get to someone like myself. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't enjoy reading legal text, hence why I'm not a lawyer. But I do enjoy my job, and I do want to stay up to date, and I do want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. So having those people who are willing to sit there and read through these massive texts with all these different terminology that I just don't understand is a really useful thing for me and for a lot of other people, because we simply either don't have time or we're not able to do that correctly. And then you get misinterpretation, and then you get mistakes, and it just has a massive knock-on effect.
Yeah, it does. And do you specifically carve out time for, because you talked about podcasts and reading and sort of watching these things, do you carve out time in your daily calendar for that time for you?
I do it on a weekly basis, but every day is really a lot for me, because I do have quite a lot to be, and a lot of other people have the same problem. We're all busy. We all have things to do, and when we're not at work, we all have other things that we need to do. So weekly, yes. Daily, not so much, because daily becomes quite unmanageable, I think, in some weeks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would always recommend like 2 hours a week, just something for your own personal, professional development, and that's kind of achievable. 30 minutes a day or whatever. Lovely. So what strategies do you do to balance so you don't get overwhelmed?
It's very much so. My weeks are very different at the moment, because I am doing a little bit of coaching as well. So I am sort of dealing with a lot of individuals. So my time is spent sort of doing that as well as data protection work. Now, when I am in a fully data protection role, my weeks are planned out the week before, and I will generally make sure that I have some downtime almost every day to try and process my day. And it will generally be at the end of the day, so it will be a time when I've been reading documents all day and I just need a bit of downtime. But then you have things like data breaches which come along and they sort of mess up your whole week, and then you have to rearrange things and you have to do that. So I am hyper organized. And if you speak to anyone that knows me, they'll say the same thing. I am hyper organized. So everything is organized as much as it physically can be. If something happens, I can rearrange, but generally my time is organized. So I sort of utilize things like my Outlook calendar and, task managers and things like that. But generally it's because if I don't put it in my calendar, I can forget. So by putting it in my calendar, it means I don't forget.
I love that. So the tip is plan to succeed. Yeah, that's it. So I need to take a leaf out of your book. So I'm semi-organised, but nowhere near as the level of you're talking about. So that's amazing advice for other people watching. So what advice would you give to somebody who wants to consider a career in our industry in data protection?
If you don't think you're going to understand, try. I spent a long time when I was trying to read the regulation thinking that I would understand none of it, and that I was just going to end up following this path down to a road that doesn't exist. So I did surprise myself, because it's not as bad as it seems. And actually, if you don't think you're going to understand, at least if you've tried, you know whether or not you have. If you don't try, you never know. And it's not always about those articles either. There's so much more to it than just the law and the regulation. Doing what we do is tough, but it is rewarding, because we are those gatekeepers there. We are there to help people, to protect people and their data, to protect their family members, and protect organizations. And it's a wonderful vocation to have. It's wonderful to think that every day I get to sort of wake up and protect somebody else's data, and I get to make sure that somebody's dealing with it in the right way, and organizations are processing it in the right way, in the way they should be. And to be part of that, from my perspective, is something else. It really is, because I've never had that before. So being part of that it's well worth trying, if you can sort of get that motivation to at least try.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've really captured that, because it's like having that understanding that you can still do the job, but you find your own way to do that job, and how you can capture those articles and then kind of deliver it and then get the same sort of satisfaction outcome that you want to give to somebody else looking after their information. So I love that, really kind of well explained there. So do you do some public speaking? Do you present business cases and conference presentations?
So I have done business cases, not so much. So I've done a few business cases in the past, which were they were usually paid for by clients. They were expecting them and things like that. Conferences are something a little bit different. I have done a couple. I've not done many, but I've done at least enough to know what it feels like to be stood up on a stage with however many people staring at you from the audience. The one thing about public speaking which I found difficult at first, which I've only recently just got to grips with, is telling the story, telling it from start to finish, getting to the end and then making it real life relatable. So the recent one I did was around acronyms and initialisms, and trying to explain to people that just because you understand what something means doesn't necessarily mean that the person across the table does. And it's really important to have that in mind, because one of the last slides that I had in the presentation was a slide around acronyms that teenagers are using. Okay. And I think a lot of people were quite shocked by it. And it's bringing that real life element into it. So I can stand there and talk to you about data protection, and stand there and do training to, several people about data protection. But actually, I will always start my training sessions off with, this is not just about the business, but this is about you as individuals. Everything I'm telling you today relates to you as individuals and the organizations that process your data, not just the way we as a business process other people's data. And that just brings it back to that person. It's that personable, relatable, real life issue that actually I'm training you on how to deal with your data that you're processing as part of a business. But this applies to businesses processing your data as well. And it's the same for public speaking. If you bring it back to that real life issue, that real life challenge, people take away a lot more than if you just spout statistics at them. It's much more likely.
Yeah, absolutely. And stories connect us. So we've been telling stories before we can kind of read and write. So that's how we communicated. So stories connect to your heart, to your compassion, and they're really good messages. One of the things, and I really like you said right at the end of your presentation that you had the one thing that teenagers are saying is actually that's the one key takeaway message. So when you're telling a story, you always want to make sure you've got one of those messages because that's what people resonate with. So that's brilliant. And was it scary the first time you did a conference presentation?
So my first experience was a little bit different, I think, to a lot of other people. So I went to speak for the very first time in Guernsey for the Channel Islands Data Protection Conference a couple of years back now. And so I flew to a country I'd never been to, or flew to a place that I'd never been to a room full of people I'd never even met, never spoken to, never had any interaction to. And I did this sort of 15, 20-minute presentation about accessibility and actually that, again, just because you're writing these policies in English or just because you've got this massive policy that you're expecting people to understand doesn't mean they're going to. And actually, you may need to think outside the box. You know, you've got people who are deaf, people who are blind. So it was kind of around that. So my first public speaking experience was me getting on a flight at 6:00 in the morning to go and speak the next day at this conference for my very first public speaking event. And I was nervous because it was my very first one. And I genuinely thought that the topic I was speaking about was really important. And I still think it's really important. And, you know, it meant a lot to me. So I wanted to make sure I did it well. So I spent about 3 or 4 months memorizing the entire presentation. And it served me very well because I think it made the point. And again, it's bringing it back to that real life thing. So I did get nervous. I don't get so nervous now because I think I've done it a couple of times. I would be too arrogant to say that I don't get nervous because I do. But yeah, it was my first time was a bit different.
But I think that's beautifully articulated in the things that I tell people. Obviously, make sure you're confident in the topic, make sure you practice it, and then the delivery becomes natural because you're part of the passion. I think that's, you know, the fact that you practiced it for 3 to 4 months, it was a topic that you were excited about and you know, really felt passionate about to deliver. I think it's amazing.
Somebody gave me the advice once of practice it until you cannot get it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what I do.
Yeah.
I just go over and over and over again, and it stayed with me. You know, the first time this particular person ever gave me, you know, advice about public speaking, she said to me, practice it until you cannot get it wrong. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't wing it. I'm not an advocate of winging it. You know, practice it is you can just see when someone's winging it. But yeah, so how do you, so it's really difficult sometimes to like put your professional development and your personal development at the forefront of what you need to achieve. Like, how do you advocate for more resources for your own personal and professional development?
I think this is really difficult. So bear with me. My partner's just come back from his lunch, so you're going to see him go back and forth. It's hard at the moment because the budget has now put a lot more responsibility on organisations, which means prices have gone up, which means, you know, their budgets for things have gone down because they simply don't have the money at the moment to kind of to put into that. It's not nice to burn out your staff. Burnt out staff make mistakes. Burnt out staff, you know, they can miss things. They can, you know, they can not follow a process because they're simply just not able to follow that process the way it should be followed. And it's not nice to hear. especially when you've got frontline staff who are so tired and burnt out that they are making mistakes, and actually then that causes consequences for them down the road, which then, demotivates them and causes its own issues. But really, staff, we're all here to make a business run well. We're all here to help an organisation run the way it should, and well enough to keep functioning as an organisation. So it is important to look at the amount of work that's required and then see whether or not more resources required. But at the same time, you have those budgetary constraints, especially at the moment where everything is so expensive anyway. And it is easier to say and a lot harder to do at the moment to say, well, we need an extra person. That's fine, but we don't really have the money to give you the extra person, so then it can cause its own issues. So I don't think there is a golden answer to that, if I'm honest. I think it's very difficult. I don't think it's going to get much easier, but it is really about your staff. Your staff are there to help you function as a business. Without your staff, I'm not sure that you'd function quite as well.
Yeah, and it is hard. I don't know if you've watched The Bear on Disney.
Not yet.
So it's like
it's on my list.
It's really good, and I obviously look for the underlining meaning of it. And they sort of like were running this sort of beef grill, and then they basically trained all the staff, and they're now kind of working towards a Michelin star restaurant. But they've actually taken the staff that what they've got, and then trained them to achieve the outcome that they want to do. And I think one of the things that I get money is an issue, but I think one of the fundamental things that people miss is that if you invest in your staff, you're investing in business growth, which leads to better outcomes for both.
Yeah.
And it was so easy for organisations to say, yeah, no, cut that off, you can't have that. But actually, if you look at it from sort of the investment side of it, that actually leads to sort of long-term growth, and also for protecting people's information. So
I think the amount of organisations who try to do everything externally, and then that just creates its own problems, because you're bringing a manager in who potentially doesn't know the job. Unless it's a specific job like us, like my job, for example, a lot of people know how my job works. So bringing a manager in, you kind of expect them to know how that works because they're managing, a data protection role. But for frontline staff, the amount of organisations I've been in where they've hired from outside, and yes, it's nice to have that new blood, that new person to come in with a fresh pair of eyes. You then spend a good couple of months teaching them your job, because they come in with these wonderful ideas and they're all very positive and they want everything to be okay. But actually sometimes you then have to stop them and go, that won't work with our job, and let me tell you why. And then you have to sort of spend your time re-educating them, which can be frustrating, I think, for both parties. Whereas if you invest in that staff and you invest in the staff you already have, you do have that knowledge already, and they know the business, they know how it works, they know the job, they know how the job works, they know its limitations. So it cuts out that middleman of spending that time having to re-educate somebody in how the job works to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the statistics of re-employing versus spending money on training and development, it's more expensive to re-employ somebody than it is just to invest in your own staff. So,
precisely.
Yeah, but it's how you sell that benefit to the business, isn't it? But yeah, no, Emma, and that you can use with different things. So we can talk about that in another podcast. But Emma, it's been absolutely sensational to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for your time. I really hope you all enjoyed it. Please subscribe and watch out for the next ones. Thank you so much. Bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye.